cold white light from the metallic ceiling shone directly downward, illumining even the floating specks of dust in the air until they resembled suspended glass crystals. The ash-gray steel walls absorbed sound in a way that created an unnatural silence, the kind that only existed in places designed to force the truth from your throat, or kill you in the process. On the floor, etched with a grid of magnetic energy codes, sat a single confinement chair forged from cold alloy, isolated in the center of the room, and in that chair, there was a man. Oren Valor. Standing about 1.80 meters, his body not overly muscular but sharply defined, the type shaped by surviving in places where oxygen was more precious than bullets, was bound with biometal restraints, glowing faintly red, like the weak pulse of a danger drawing near. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth, bruises darkened under his eyes, but his gaze didn't waver. His arms were locked behind the chair, his neck pressed down by a claw-shaped restraint, and directly in front of him stood a female officer with silver-hued skin, a genetic trait common among the tactical class of the Cyrethians. She had just slapped him, a slap that didn't leave a mark, but tilted his jaw as if gravity itself had buckled. She was breathing heavily, not from fatigue, but from anger she hadn't yet discharged. "Humans?" Her voice was dry, raspy like rusted metal scraping together, her eyes unable to mask the disdain mixed with irritation, always thinking that resisting somehow makes you significant. Oren squinted and then smiled, a crooked grin with a streak of deep red at the corner of his lips. "I think that slap just proved I'm right." His words weren't loud, weren't aggressive, but they made the silence afterward twice as heavy, like a plasma sphere compressed between two magnetic shields, ready to explode under excessive pressure. Then the door behind them opened silently. No alarm, no footsteps, but everything, the air, the light, the very attention in the room shifted the moment she entered. Belissa came. High Commander of Cyrethian Intelligence. Renowned not only for her mastery in counter-espionage, but for a presence that defied description, using any term commonly reserved for living beings. She didn't walk, she glided through space as if untethered by gravity. Her liquid frame biosuit clung to every contour of her body like it had grown from her skin. The bluish-gray metallic sheen of her armor contrasted starkly with the dark hair coiled into a precise high bun. Everything about her was calculated to allure without exposure, deadly without drawing a weapon. She didn't even glance at the female officer who was still catching her breath. With a flick of her hand, "Leave." The words were soft as a breeze, yet carried the weight of a death sentence. The officer bowed instantly and withdrew. No one dared to defy Belissa Khan. The last person who had tried was erased from all data systems, both digital and biological. The door closed. Now only two remained. Oren lifted his head slightly and looked. For the first time, the smirk on his lips faded. This woman wasn't just another officer. Something about her felt unstable, like touching technology too advanced for the human brain, both mesmerizing and terrifying to the marrow. Belissa approached, holding a data tablet lit with pale yellow holograms. Her eyes, pupils glowing like liquid plasma, scanned the report with utter detachment. "You activated the station's biosensory grid," she said. Her voice wasn't harsh, it was soft like melting ice, cold and never fully thawed. "Biological signal anomalies, pheromones unregistered in any known structure, and notably, 3 female officers suffered biochemical responses after close contact." She looked up. "Explain." Oren leaned back as far as the restraint allowed. The chains creaked, an airy sound that somehow stretched time itself. "Sometimes I have that effect," he said with a lazy shrug. "Could be the smell, could be the charisma." Again, Belissa didn't react. No smirk, no frown, just a slight tilt of her head as if analyzing the molecular structure of his words. "You will undergo a full scan," she said flatly. "No speaking, no resistance." Oren chuckled. "And if I resist?" This time, her eyes narrowed barely, but the motion was sharp as a plasma blade. "Then we escalate." Oren nodded slowly, as if contemplating dinner, but his eyes locked onto her neck, where a line of biocircuit ran from her ear down to her collarbone. A weakness? A detail worth remembering? She turned away, closing the report. Said nothing more. Walked out as if she had completed a transaction. No regret, no glance back. Oren exhaled deeply, not out of relief. He knew full well this was just the surface ice. Something beneath was already shifting. And he, a human from Earth, either mistakenly arrested or deliberately framed, had just stepped into a labyrinth with no exits. But as always, when there were no exits, he'd make one. With his hands, with his teeth, with blood, or with whatever it was that made those 3 female officers lose control. The biometric scanning system aboard Station Orzana was no ordinary tech. Programmed to analyze biological signals down to the cellular level, it could detect the slightest irregularity in respiration, in protein structure, even in emotional fluctuations mapped across alpha brainwaves. Yet, when Valissa Kine initiated the first scan on Oren Velor, the system returned an unprecedented result. Biological diffraction exceeds threshold. Unable to complete scan. Suggestion, direct physical contact required for calibration. Valissa stared at the message on the screen, her thin brows narrowing slightly. This wasn't the result she had anticipated. Nor was it something she had ever encountered before, and that disturbed her more than being threatened with a plasma blade. She returned to the holding room, this time without the data tablet. It was no longer necessary. Everything she needed now was inside that room, or more precisely, inside the man seated within it. "Stand up," she said, pressing a personal command code to release the restraints. Oren glanced at his newly freed wrists, then arched an eyebrow. "Isn't this the part where you say, 'Run before I change my mind'?" She didn't answer. She simply issued one cold, precise order. "Take off your clothes." No anger, no seduction, no threat, just a command, cold as circuitry, but one that shifted the temperature of the room in an instant. Oren raised a brow, lips curling slightly as if this was the first joke of the day worth enjoying. "Are we testing a new interrogation technique? Or is this where I confess with my body?" "You're creating biological interference," she replied firmly, without retracting a word. "I need to eliminate all foreign materials before rescanning." Oren nodded as if she'd just explained the operation manual of a dishwasher. He unbuttoned his shirt, one button at a time, unhurried. When the last layer fell to the floor in a soft heap around his feet, his body was revealed beneath the overhead lights. Tanned, marked by old scars along the ribs, and sculpted in that functional way only those who've survived where gravity is unreliable tend to be. Valissa gave no reaction. She reached to her belt and pulled out a pair of bioscan gloves. As she slipped them on, the sensors auto-calibrated to her body temperature, the fingertips lighting up like precise sensory blades. She stepped forward, stopping when she was less than a foot away from him. "I will touch key points to collect energy readings. Do not react." "And if I do react," he repeated, for the second time. She didn't respond. Instead, she placed her hand flat on his sternum, gliding it slowly downward across his torso. At first, it was purely procedural. But the moment her hand reached the left side of his ribs, a seemingly non-critical area, the energy graph on her wrist spiked. A red warning blinked. The gloves beeped, pulse by pulse, as if registering something far outside its expected parameters. Valissa froze. Her hand remained on his skin, but her eyes no longer tracked the data. She looked at him, really looked for the first time, as if trying to determine whether the flicker she felt inside her body was a hallucination or something far more dangerous. Oren didn't speak, but his gaze shifted from playful to sharp, like a scalpel under a surgeon's glove. He could sense the change, the warmth from her hand, the sudden uptick in her breathing, and the smell. There was a strange scent in the air. Not entirely pheromonal, not fully organic, a fusion between ozone and warm resin, wild, raw, and primal. It didn't come from him. It came from her. She stepped back, quickly, as though she'd just been caught feeling something she wasn't supposed to. "Scan terminated. That's enough," she said, but her voice no longer held the same flat calm. Oren didn't move, only exhaled slowly. "You touched me longer than necessary. Why?" Valissa didn't answer right away. A A faint tremble, nearly imperceptible, passed through her shoulder. And in that instant, the bio-armor wrapped around her arms briefly shimmered with a hint of violet. A warning pulse indicating her internal biochemistry was nearing critical stimulation levels. "You're disrupting the data," she murmured, no longer looking at him but instead at her own hand, the one that had just touched a body her mind could no longer rationally analyze. "Or maybe it's not the data that's disrupted," Oren said, voice low, moving in slightly closer. "Maybe it's you." She looked up, and in her eyes, just for a moment, was a flash of confusion, just a flicker. But to Oren, that was all he needed to know. The battlefield had just shifted. Neither of them said anything for a few seconds, but within the metallic silence of Station Orzana, the air between them seemed to grow thick, compressed by an invisible force, charged with heat, static, and signals no science could quantify. Oren's eyes didn't leave her. Velissa didn't step back, but neither did she move forward. She stood frozen between two versions of herself. One, the cold Cerethian officer loyal to the Order, and the other, a woman confronting something she had never experienced. A biological stir, triggered by a species considered beneath her. The pheromonal waves between them fluctuated erratically. The bioscan system lit up with alerts for the third time. But this time, the readings didn't just show anomalies coming from him. They clearly registered. The increasing signals were emanating from Velissa's own body, skin temperature rising, secretions from the microglands at her wrist altering. Her heartbeat, normally maintained at 47 BPM like all high-ranking Cerethian officers, was now approaching 90. Velissa bit her lower lip. A subtle gesture, but enough for Oren to notice. "You're contaminating me," she said, voice hoarse, as if even she wasn't sure of her own words. "I've never experienced a reaction like this." "So I'm special?" Oren asked, brow raised, half joking, half serious. "You're an anomaly," she shot back quickly. But her gaze was no longer steely. It moved over his body, not a scan this time, but a look. Swift, yes, but not swift enough to hide the fact that she had looked, not to assess, but to see. "You know?" Oren tilted his head slightly, arms folded loosely over his bare chest. "Your body's saying something very different from what your mouth just did." That made her tighten her fist. The biosensor on her wrist blinked like an erratic heartbeat. She abruptly turned around, tapping rapidly on the wall console. A cooling stream hissed down from the ceiling, bathing the room in a soft blue light. Quiet, sterile. But it was useless. The physiological readings kept climbing. The changes inside her were no longer within control. And what startled Velissa most wasn't the pace of the reaction. It was how it felt. She wasn't scared. She wasn't disgusted. She wasn't even resisting. She wanted to know where this would go. Oren took a single step toward her. His voice dropped, no longer teasing, now grounded and quiet. "Do you want me to stop?" She said nothing. Her breathing grew heavier. "Just say the word," he added, his tone barely more than a whisper into flame. Velissa turned back toward him, eyes glowing with something strange. Her lips parted, and after a long pause, she exhaled. Not like an order, not like a commander, but like a woman finally admitting something she could no longer suppress. "You made me wet." The room froze for a beat. Oren paused. His brown eyes narrowed, not out of shock, but something between intrigue and satisfaction. "Sorry, what did you say?" he asked, voice soft as air. Velissa took a step back, not to escape, but as if needing space to admit it again. This time her voice was steadier, slower. "Not literally," she said. I can't control it. My biosuit is registering abnormal moisture levels in the central neural contact zone." She hesitated, then continued as though confessing a tactical failure to her superior. "I can't continue operating in this suit anymore." Oren didn't smile. He simply stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Then," he said, voice steady as breath, "what do you want me to do about it?" Velissa inhaled sharply. Her hand clenched slightly, as if she were grappling with something inside herself. The overhead lights shifted from white to violet, the unofficial indicator of bioemotional disruption exceeding threshold on a Cerethian station. She looked into his eyes, and this time her voice held no command, no denial, just a quiet, trembling, honest request. Fix it, with your mouth. The words she had just spoken were like a forbidden biological command, a statement that couldn't be taken back, but it was the most honest thing Velissa had ever said in her life. Fix it, with your mouth. What followed was a silence so deep it could have swallowed galaxies. No system alerts, no emergency tones, just her heartbeat, pounding wildly in her chest, and Oren's eyes widening, not out of shock, but because she had finally voiced what he had only dared to sense, suspect, and silently hoped for. Oren didn't move immediately. He watched her, as if waiting to see whether this was a trap, some bizarre Cyrethian morality test. But it wasn't. Velissa was trembling. Actually trembling. Her lips were pressed together not to restrain anger, but to keep hunger from escaping as gasping breath. No one had ever unsettled her like this. No one had ever gotten this close enough for her to feel every breath, every vibration in the air, closer than one step apart. She whispered, her voice more like a note of music lost before it was played. I don't know why. But my body, it's chosen you. It's not listening to me anymore. Oren stepped forward. Every move was a breath of control. He lifted his hand but didn't touch her right away. Instead, he gently reached behind her neck, fingers threading into the tight, disciplined knot of her hair, and released it. Her hair fell in a cascade of black over her shoulders like liquid night. The gesture was simple, but carried the weight of liberation, freeing a part of Velissa even she had buried deep, the part that was soft, feminine, longing to be something other than a weapon. He leaned in, not rushed, not greedy. His lips brushed her neck, skin cool like living silver, but warming beneath each contact. Her eyes closed, her entire body felt disconnected from the command center, drifting into a zero-gravity zone where nothing existed but sensation. As his lips moved lower, touching the inside of her wrist, where her biosuit sensor had once flared red, she let out a sound. Not a protest, but a breath shattered by sudden, unfiltered pleasure. Her hand gripped his shoulder, not for control, but to keep herself from collapsing. Oren didn't ask, didn't demand. He simply listened to her body. A maze unfamiliar, yet a map rewriting itself in his hands. His fingers traced downward to her lower abdomen, sensing how the biosuit clung tightly to her body, moisture having overwhelmed its limits. It was nearly translucent now with the heat, and he could see the trails of sweat gliding down her curves. He whispered into her ear, his voice low and electric. If you want me to stop, now's the time to say so. Velissa opened her eyes. In the violet glow of the chamber, those eyes no longer gleamed with steel, but like a deep lake with fire beneath its surface. Don't, she breathed, lips barely brushing his. Don't stop. No matter what happens, don't stop. That was the final release command. Oren sank to his knees, slow, deliberate. Not like a man claiming a prize, but like someone answering a need she hadn't known how to voice. He peeled back the living armor around her hips, smooth and gentle, each centimeter making her want to scream from the unbearable ache. And when his mouth reached that place, the one long guarded by rank, by reason, by pride, Velissa lost every word in her vocabulary. She was not a commander, not a Cyrethian, not ruler or subordinate. She was a woman, flesh and breath, melting in the touch of a man she once labeled as dangerous. He healed her, not with medicine, not with speech, but with lips, with tongue, with rhythms no one had taught him, no code had written, something purely human, something that made all Cyrethian theories about emotional discipline crumble into nothing. Waves of release rippled through her body, not because of skill, but because she allowed herself to let go, for the first time, completely. And as Velissa arched her back, gasping, clutching the wall like she'd been struck by lightning, she understood. There was no going back anymore. As Velissa's breathing began to steady, the air in the room still hadn't cooled, but awareness was returning, not emotional, but instinctual. She stood leaning against the wall, her biosuit still hanging loosely around her hips, her breath still scented with the heat of skin and bioarousal recently awakened. Oren lifted his head, his eyes no longer teasing or challenging, just quiet reverence. A kind of silence only shared by those who've experienced a connection too deep for logic to explain. Felissa placed her hand on her chest, as if to confirm that yes, she had just broken every rule, every limit she'd ever lived by. No commands, no protocols, just him. But that moment passed as fast as a plasma flare. The door suddenly burst open. Not by code, but by override. A figure stood there, tall, jaw sharp, dark uniform reflecting the violet glow of the room. His eyes showed no surprise, only cold calculation, like he had known this would happen all along. "Commander Drake Verne, you are a Cyrethian officer," he said, his voice cutting like a tribunal verdict. "And you've allowed your body to be contaminated by an F-class biological entity." Felissa turned, zipping her suit without a word. Not hurried, not ashamed. In her eyes now, there was no more confusion, only a strange, unsettling calm. "He is not an F-class entity," she said. Her voice wasn't raised, but it struck like a pulse cannon. "He's the only thing that's made me feel alive." Drake stepped in, face unreadable. "You've allowed yourself to be manipulated. He emits biochemical stimulants, disrupts neural grids. 3 officers were already affected. You are the 4th. You are no longer qualified to command." "Then revoke my rank," she replied. "I don't need it." Oren stood up, bare, no armor, no weapons, but he stood like a warrior. He stepped forward, his eyes locked on Drake's. "What do you want? Execution? Disassembly? Extract my genome so you can feed it into your bioweapons lab?" Drake didn't answer right away. He looked at both of them, then pulled out a hard expulsion order. Zone 9. A sealed biological detainment zone, where all non-compliant entities were sent to vanish off every map. "He will be transferred to Zone 9 within the hour," Drake declared. "As for you, if you do not immediately sever interaction, you will be disconnected from the life-linked system. You will exist as a discarded asset. A choice, but really a blade at the throat." Felissa no longer looked at Drake. She turned to Oren. Their eyes met. No words needed. He spoke softly like a breath. "You can still walk this back. Say you were coerced, that I manipulated you. They'll spare you, let you keep your position." She smiled, soft, without regret. "You've erased every stable data stream in me," she said, "but for the first time, I feel like the one making the decision." Then she turned to Drake, eyes sharp as a blade. "I choose not to return. I choose to leave the system. And if you touch him, I'll crash the Orzana command hub beyond recovery." Drake gave a short, scornful laugh. "You have no authority anymore." "I don't need authority. I have knowledge," she replied. "And I've embedded the full core schematic into my secondary neural node. Kill me, and you lose the entire station." For a moment, the air thickened like the planet itself held its breath. Then Drake turned on his heel, leaving behind a sentence made of ice. "You won't survive long." The door sealed behind him, no sound, but it might as well have been a collapse. Felissa turned back and exhaled slowly. "We have less than an hour." Oren nodded. "Then let's start blowing this place up." There was no more time for hesitation or doubt. The moment the door closed behind Drake Verne, every safe map inside Felissa's mind spontaneously burned itself away. All official escape routes were gone. And that was exactly how it needed to be. Because if there had still been a sanctioned path, she might have remained a piece of the system. And the system, now, was the enemy. She didn't speak much. Just gave Oren a single glance. A glance like the nod shared between 2 soldiers before they blow through a wall and dive into the fire. They exited the interrogation room through a maintenance shaft, weaving through the logistical corridors she had helped design when Orzana Station was first upgraded. Every step was calculated. No security camera spotted them. No patrol drone flagged them. She didn't need to dodge. She deactivated each subsystem milliseconds before it could see them. By the time they reached the biocore chamber, the central hub that stored the neural signal maps of all officers, the genetic templates of every station inhabitant, and internal routing logs, Felissa finally stopped. She removed the biosync pad from her wrist, exposing a secondary neural cable. It was barely 3 centimeters long, glowing with a soft orange-gray hue, extracted directly from her subspinal implant, like a living extension of her own nervous system. She plugged it straight into the data core. Instantly, the system flared a red warning. Unauthorized access. Agent resigned or expelled. Oren stepped to the side panel, pulled out an auxiliary power line, and disconnected the logic circuit's primary fuse. With power interrupted, the system lost autonomous judgment. And in that instant, the entire operating environment became theirs to commandeer. Felissa sat down, closed her eyes. Keep me safe for 5 minutes. If anyone touches me during that time, I won't be able to disconnect cleanly. Got it, Oren said, gripping a plasma tool for defense. But in his chest, it wasn't just alertness, it was awe. This woman, the same one who had made him kneel between interrogation walls and stirred the wildest instincts in him, was now sitting at the very core of an empire's nervous system. And she was commanding it using nothing but her own body. 5 minutes, perhaps the longest minutes of Oren's life. Not because of danger, but because he was witnessing it, seeing the blue data streams pulse through her connection, watching the subtle twitches in her neck, the faint spasms in her tendons from the strain, as though she were battling an entire swarm of digital leviathans in an invisible domain. Then, all at once, every alert in the core went dark. Not a blackout, a precision wipe, down to the last bit. Felissa opened her eyes. Her voice was calm. Your biological data, deleted. Your interrogation record, erased. Camera signal sectors, scrubbed for the past 6 hours. I just did the same for myself. From this moment forward, neither of us ever existed on Orzana Station. Oren smiled faintly. You just killed your old self with your own hands. Felissa tilted her head, smiled back. A quiet, razor-thin smile reserved only for the man who had made her wet, and then helped her burn every reason to ever look back. Now comes the hard part, she said. Which is, he asked, getting out of here, alive. Oren rolled his shoulders, then bent down and pulled a plain Cerethian medical uniform from a nearby storage unit, unmarked, no identity trace. He slipped it on, not forgetting to attach the fake ID tag Felissa handed him, the kind used for transporting corpses or biohazard samples that didn't require secondary checks. Where's the stretcher? He asked, like a partner in crime who'd escaped with her 100 times before. Felissa opened the recessed wall panel, revealing a pre-programmed biostretcher. She gestured toward it with a slight nod. Get in, look convincingly dead, and don't breathe when they scan your lungs. Oren lay down, pulling the organic sheath over himself. It clung to his skin, cold like the first time he'd laid back on his mother's gravestone a century ago on Earth. A chill not of the flesh, but of a new life beginning. Felissa sealed the chamber, adjusted the outer temperature setting to S-class clinical death. She scanned the room one last time, double-checking any trace data. Nothing remained. No one remained. Just 2 former instruments of a rigid order, now fugitives, rewriting their own existence bite by bite. She pushed the stretcher toward the technical exit. Each wheel that touched the floor made only the faintest sound, but to her it was the drumbeat of defiance. She was no longer Felissa of Cerethian. And he was no longer the captured anomaly. They were a unit, a spark, a breach, a beginning. Not every escape begins with an explosion or a blaring siren. Sometimes the most terrifying thing is silence, the artificial stillness of a lake hiding a swarm of predators just beneath its calm surface. The stretcher glided smoothly across the polished titanium floors of the medical wing. The partition glass panels reflected Felissa's figure, clad in a white doctor's coat, hood pulled low over her face, leaving only her eyes visible. Eyes sharp enough to suggest she already had every detail of the corridor memorized. Every automatic door opened at the wave of her biometric clearance. Not a single hint of suspicion. No one realized that the woman pushing this S-class stretcher had just deleted Orzana Station's central data vault with her own hands. Inside the stretcher's hard casing, Oren held his breath to a bare minimum. His heart beat slow and steady, just enough not to trigger the station's biometric sensors. His skin stuck to the cooling gel, eyes half-lidded, mind hyperactive. He listened to the soft roll of the wheels, to each of her footsteps, and beneath it all, a quiet internal voice repeated, "We're almost out. Just a few more minutes." The final level, biological transfer bay, had only one automated checkpoint. A single security officer stood guard, hand on the console, eyes heavy from a long shift. He glanced up lazily and asked, "Where's this one going?" Felissa didn't look at him. She glanced at the projected data from her wristband and read aloud the pre-scripted authorization. Lower-level biological quarantine. Status confirmed death under 1 hour. Suspected G-class neurodecay gas exposure. Immediate containment required. The officer grimaced. Not out of suspicion, but out of fear. That G-class neurodecay substance she mentioned could melt brain tissue in 30 seconds if inhaled without triple filtration. He instantly waved them through. No checks, no questions. Felissa dipped her head slightly, gliding past him like a whisper in white. The doors slid open. As the steel shut behind them, she finally exhaled. Just one checkpoint left, the emergency launch bay. She pushed the stretcher into the sealed room at the end of the corridor. Violet emergency lights pulsed across the curved walls. A small ship lay dormant inside the chamber. No weapons, no long-range nav systems, but enough to leave the station, and with luck, reach the nearest unregulated zone. The wild planet Vera 3. She activated the emergency launch sequence. Red lights began circling the vessel's hull. As the cargo door unsealed, Felissa peeled back the cover over the stretcher, leaned close to Oren and whispered, "Wake up. It's time to die, so we can live again." Oren's eyes snapped open. In one smooth motion, he sat up, pulled her inside, and his hands danced across the Cyrethian flight controls, as if born knowing their language. No words were needed, no strategies discussed. Everything had already been decided, not through conversation, but through every glance they had exchanged in the past hours. The ship trembled. Plasma engines hissed awake. Every system on Orzana would detect the unauthorized launch in exactly 17 seconds. Doors closing in 3, 2. A sharp jolt. The vessel blasted free from the docking cradle like a black arrow, slicing through the station's magnetic field into the star-dusted void. Oren gripped the directional throttle. Felissa sat beside him, hands still trembling from adrenaline, but her eyes burned bright. Not with fear, but with freedom. For the first time in her life. "Where are we going?" he asked, eyes fixed on trajectory. "Vera 3, she replied. "Unclaimed planet, no satellites, no control nets, but it has forests, water, and an old outpost I helped design, never activated." Oren smirked. "Sounds like the perfect place for two fugitives to build a kingdom." She looked at him, not like a soldier, not like a commander, but like someone who had finally decided who she wanted beside her when everything else collapsed. He took her hand. For the first time since they met, it wasn't to interrogate, to provoke, or to react. It was simply to squeeze, softly. A confirmation. I'm still here, and I'm not leaving. Ahead, Vera 3 began to emerge beneath the plasma haze. A soft streak of violet blue amidst the cold emptiness of space. No light, no people. But for them, it was home. The ship pierced through the thin atmosphere of Vera 3 like a blazing spear. The heat from the first friction shook the outer hull violently, the metal groaning through the soundproof casing like the heavy breath of a creature writhing to give birth to itself. Oren gripped the navigation lever tightly, eyes locked on the guidance screen, while Felissa strapped herself in, her face betraying not a flicker of panic. It wasn't the landing she feared, it was the thought that everything might end before it ever truly began. Then came a deep, muffled impact. Purple dust from Vera 3 splashed against the view shield, clouding all visibility. But the ship had stopped. Safe. Intact. Alive. Oren opened the cockpit hatch. A cold gust rushed in, carrying the scent of scorched alloy, wild plant resin, and something faintly like soil after rain. He stepped out first, his boots pressing into a thick mat of deep indigo moss. Above the sky was a violet fog, with sunlight filtering through like it was passing through tinted glass. Around them stretched a forest, not dense but alive. Tree roots as thick as arms twisted up from the ground, flowing in silence like ancient currents. Felissa followed. Her bioarmor no longer held the cold sheen it wore back on Orzana. Beneath the planet's strange light, it shimmered with softer hues of silver and violet. No longer armor, but skin. A new skin. They said nothing for the first 15 minutes. They just walked. Like two souls who had survived death and were now stepping into a realm where nothing had ever been defined. After a few turns along rocky outcrops, they reached a fiberglass structure, an abandoned research outpost Felissa had once helped design but never set foot in. She unlocked it with a palm code. It still worked. The main room flickered to life using residual self-replenishing energy. Faint but warm. Inside, there was a dust-covered control desk, a folded emergency bed, a water storage locker, and a small air regeneration unit. Just enough to survive. Just enough to start. Felissa sat in a chair, pulled off her hood, and let her hair fall. For the first time since it all began, she shed every layer of disguise, every rank, every title. There was only her. A woman who had betrayed everything. To hold on to someone who wasn't like her. Oren took a heat capsule, poured a few drops into a metal kettle, and waited as warmth slowly spread. He sat across from her. "So we're dead," he said quietly. "According to every system, the fugitives from Orzana never left the station." "And now," she replied, chin resting on her hand, eyes on him, "we're alive, without any data to prove it." A moment passed, as if even Vera 3 bowed in silent affirmation. Then Oren leaned across the table and took her hand, not to pull, not to push, just to place it there, like laying the first brick for a home in a place no one had dared to build in. Felissa didn't pull away. She looked at him, not with walls or doubts, but with the kind of gaze one gives after choosing to let someone be the reason they're no longer afraid to be vulnerable. "I used to believe," she whispered, "that love was a system flaw, a redundant feedback between neural pathways." "And now," he asked, "now I think, maybe I'm ready to keep malfunctioning forever." Outside, the sky of Vera 3 shimmered with strange blue-green clouds, no comms, no signal. But for two people who had once belonged to the system, this place, this nowhere, was where they finally had everything. The first night on Vera 3 came with no familiar sounds. No alarms, no marching boots of armed officers, no synthetic female voice reciting sterilization orders or surveillance notices. Only the wind rustling through violet leaves, the soft whisper of foliage like shallow waves, and the synchronized breaths of two strangers, once from opposing sides of a system governed by fear and enforced order. In the tiny outpost nestled deep in the abandoned wilderness, the golden glow of a biological heater shimmered across their bare skin, melting the room into something soft and dreamlike. Oren lay on his side, watching Felissa resting her head on his arm, her black-violet hair fanned across his chest like a symbol of surrender, not to strength, but to a feeling long suppressed. She spoke softly, no longer in the voice of an officer, no longer the tone of someone who once issued commands in interrogation rooms. "I don't feel cold anymore, even though it's 12 degrees outside. Is it because I'm radiating Earth-human warmth through my blood?" Oren teased, his hand tracing lazy patterns along her back, as if he were writing the things he never dared say out loud. "No," she murmured, nuzzling closer into him. "It's because there's something inside you that our systems could never replicate, could never simulate, could never even name. And now, it's right here." "Are you talking about love?" he asked. Felissa didn't answer immediately. She pressed her lips to his chest, just above the steady pulse of his heart. A moment later she whispered, so softly it was more breath than voice, "No, I'm talking about home." They lay there for a long time, no blankets, no armor, only each other. Occasionally, Oren spoke of Earth, not war or politics, but of morning coffee aromas, the sound of night rain tapping against tin roofs, and the feeling of touching someone's wrist and knowing, in that moment, you would never be alone again. Felissa listened like someone who had never truly lived before. Each word and cadence slipping into hollow spaces, even Cyrithian biotech had never managed to heal. When he asked her, "If you could choose again, would you still become a commander?" She shook her head instantly, without hesitation. "No," she said. Because now I know, commanding an army is easier than holding onto one hand. They made love that night. Not fast, not frantic, not needing to prove anything. It was slow, deep, and real. No programming, no activation commands, just instinct, finally loved. And when Valissa lay curled against Oren's chest afterward, she whispered into his skin, "If I was ever a system, then you're the one flaw I never want to fix." Months after the ship carrying Oren and Valissa vanished from all known radar systems, Orzana Station deleted every record tied to the interrogation incident. They labeled it a minor biocontainment anomaly, then returned to their investigations, strategic briefings, and reports that never missed a digit. No one within the system dared ask about her. Valissa Kane, the former head of Cyrethian counterintelligence, and no one uttered the name of the Earthborn man, Oren Velor, a genetic stray who somehow caused 4 trained female officers to lose control. They were gone, as if they had never existed. But, in a distant corner of the star map, where the quiet planet Vera 3 still orbited its pale blue sun, a faint energy signature pulsed, not stable, not registered, just strong enough to remind the universe, someone is alive here, and they don't want to be disturbed. In an old, half-forgotten research outpost, nestled in the violet woods, Oren was sawing wood to repair the outer awning. Sweat clung to his brow, his hands bare but steady, lifting each board as if he were building the future with his own 2 hands. Valissa sat below, holding a bioreader while recalibrating a sensor rig designed to grow plant strains from her homeworld. She no longer served any system, but now she worked for the life they shared. When the sun dipped low, they sat beside each other at the doorway, bare feet resting on grass as soft as woven wool. She leaned on his shoulder, his arm draped around her. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Above them, the sky was filled with stars, not the cold constellations once mapped into strategic targeting systems, but nameless lights, like the universe's eyes, watching them gently from afar. Oren asked quietly, "If someone comes one day, would you leave?" Valissa shook her head, then answered, in a voice no longer of a commander, but of a woman both peaceful and proud, "If they manage to find us, it means we've lived long enough to leave a trace, and I'm not ashamed of that trace." He smiled, softly, and pulled her closer. Far above, the stars kept moving, and among the billions of untold stories across the planets, there was one small story, of an alien girl who learned how to love, and a man from Earth who never stopped fighting, not to win, but to hold her hand. Every single day, no glory, no system, only this. They still had each other.